The myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was the king of the city of Corinth and was viewed by many as the most cunning of all men. Allow me to tell you some of the many stories about his williness. One time, Sisyphus had witnessed Zeus abducting young and beautiful women that included Aegina. Sisyphus, the ever-willing man, made a deal with Aegina's father, Asopus. He'd tell him who had made off with his daughter if Asopus made a spring gush onto the citadel of Corinth. Asopus agreed to this, and Sisyphus pointed out the suspect, which made Zeus really furious. So, Zeus sent Thanatos, the spirit of death, to carry the stubborn Sisyphus off to the underworld. But Zeus had underestimated how wily Sisyphus was. When Thanatos had arrived, he chained up this deathly agent and in doing so, suspended death across all of the world. Nobody could die even in wars, which angered Ares, the god of war. But Sisyphus was forced by Zeus to unchain Thanatos so that a daily business of death could resume. Unfortunately for Sisyphus, his name was first on the list. But once again, Sisyphus tricked his way out of it. He hatched a plan with his wife, telling her that he shouldn't observe the funeral rites usually accorded to a dead person. When Sisyphus arrived in the underworld, he complained to Hades that his wife had refused to honor his death. So, Hades agreed to let him go back and chastise his rude widow. The trick worked, and Sisyphus somehow got away with living for many more years. But no mortal could escape a natural death. When Sisyphus eventually died, the gods made sure he couldn't trick his way out of the underworld anymore. He was condemned to roll a massive boulder up a hill, only to have the rock roll back down to the bottom, and he had to start all over again and again and again for eternity. The myth of Sisyphus.
Ulitin mo. Alright, that concludes the story of the myth of Sisyphus. So in the end, kahit gaano tayo ka-diskarte, kahit gaano tayo ka-utak, hindi pa rin natin talaga matatalo yung fate natin, which is destined death. Though I commend Sisyphus kasi 2 beses niyang natakasan yung death, diba? What more, 2 beses nang nadaya yung gods. Now we will be talking not just the myth itself, but the whole philosophical essay. But before we begin, let's get to know the author first, which is Albert Camus. Albert Camus is a French novelist, essayist, and playwright born in 1913. He won a Nobel Prize for Literature back in 1957 for, quote, his important literary production, which with clear-sighted earnestness illuminates the problems of human conscience in our times. Some of his works are The Stranger, The Plague, The Fall, The Rebel, and of course our focus for this discussion, the myth of Sisyphus. Now, the myth of Sisyphus was written in 1942, and the central topic of this philosophical essay revolves around the concept of life being absurd. Now, anong ibig sabihin ni Camus dun sa statement na life being absurd? Well, let's find out. Camus started his philosophical essay with this quote of Pindar which says, "O my soul, do not aspire to immortal life, but exhaust the limits of the possible." Sinali niya itong quote na to kasi basically, ito yung gusto niyang iparating, ito yung gusto niyang i-convey sa mga readers, to make us realize that concepts such as the afterlife, reincarnation, greater will, reincarnation, sinasabi ko na pala, are not real. So we should focus in our life kung anong meron tayo ngayon. Squeeze out and do as many things as we can while we still live. Now, sa myth of Sisyphus, binigyang diin ni Camus yung importance ng existential problems and suicide. Sinabi niya din na yung suicide daw, ito lang daw yung pinakaseryosong problem pagdating sa philosophy. Quote, "There is only one really serious problem, philosophical problem rather, and that is suicide." Now, some of us may react to this and say that, wait, di ba meron ding ibang philosophical problems na importante? Katulad ng problems regarding ethics, morals, ontological problems or God's existence, justice, and the like. Hindi ba importante itong mga to? Hindi ba dapat seryosohin din natin itong mga problems na to? Well, according kay Camus, kaya kinoconsider niyang importante or pinaka-serious yung suicide is because it is directly concerned with life and death. As he said, quote, "I have never seen anyone die for the ontological argument. On the other hand, I see many people die because they judge that life is not worth living." For example, i-compare natin yung morals, philosophical problems regarding morals, and philosophical problems regarding existence or existential problems. Morals, pag may ginawa tayo and hindi tayo sure if tama or mali yung ginawa natin, we ask ourselves, tama ba yung ginawa ko? Ito ba dapat yung ginawa ko? Hindi ba mali yung ginawa ko? Kumbaga ang nangyayari is nagre-reflect tayo dun sa action na ginawa natin as a response to the experience. Like for example, nakakita ka ng pera, 500 or kaya 1K, sige para mas malaki. Pinulsa mo dahil hindi mo nakita kung yung may-ari. Iisipin mo kung tama ba yung ginawa mo? Hindi ba dapat nagtanong ka muna sa mga nasa paligid? Punta naman tayo sa existential problems. Pag nagtatanong tayo about sa purpose ng life natin, bakit ako nabubuhay? Anong silbi ko sa mundo? Bakit ako nandito? Bakit ang hirap ng buhay? Pumapasok yung idea ng suicide to end life early. Kasi 'di ba, gusto nating takasan yung mga problems na dulot ng life. And tinatanong natin yung mga yan pag nakaka-experience tayo ng mga problems. Kasi hindi naman tayo magtatanong ng ganon kung masaya tayo. Now, according to Camus, committing suicide implies one's recognition that life is absurd and that we succumb to the absurdity of life. So parang pag nagko-commit daw tayong suicide, aware tayo na irrational or illogical ang buhay and sumusuko na tayo sa absurdity na nararanasan natin. Now the question is, ano ba exactly yung tinutukoy ni Camus na absurd? Tayo bang mga tao, yung absurd, o yung mundo? Well, the answer is neither. It is actually the conflict between the human desire to seek inherent value and meaning in life and the unreasonable silence of the world as a response to this desire. In short, it is the interaction between the human and the universe. Kasi diba tayong mga tao, lagi tayong nagtatanong kung ano ba ang saysay ng buhay natin sa mundo. Ano ang meaning ng life? Bakit nandito tayo sa mundo? Pero kahit ilang beses tayong magtanong, walang binibigay na sagot yung mundo. Silent treatment lang, kumbaga, yung nare-receive natin. Camus also said that the absurd is a direct consequence of God's absence. Now, bakit niya sinasabi to? Anong part ba ni God? Kasi 'di ba, we describe God as the all-knowing, and He should be kasi siya yung gumawa ng lahat, siya yung gumawa sa atin. So, kung magtatanong tayo anong purpose natin sa life, makukuha natin agad yung sagot kung nagre-reply siya. Pero dahil wala siya, paulit-ulit lang tayo, stuck lang tayo sa cycle ng pagtatanong and hindi pagre-receive ng kahit anong sagot. It is also important to note that Camus said specifically na absent si God. Hindi niya sinabing not real. Kasi although wala tayong proof na nag-e-exist talaga si God, wala din tayong proof na hindi siya nag-e-exist and hindi natin mapapatunayan na hindi siya nag-e-exist. Ngayon, Dahil hindi nagbibigay ng sagot yung mundo, gumagawa tayo ng mga unproven beliefs or absurd walls na ginagawa nating reason para sa mga bagay-bagay na nangyayari sa buhay, para magkaroon ng meaning yung buhay natin, hence, to evade the absurd. Example of such beliefs are karma, God's plan, heaven and hell, everlasting life. Kung isipin, madaming tao ang naniniwala sa mga bagay na to, pero hindi sila proven. For example, kung totoo ang karma, bakit may mga taong mababait na unang namamatay kaysa sa masasama? Bakit may mga taong gumagawa ng masama pero hindi napaparusahan? Hindi rin natin malalaman kung totoo ang heaven and hell, everlasting life, reincarnation, or life after death. Kasi imposible tayong makakuha ng witness dahil patay na nga yung mga nakakaranas nito, if totoo man to. Now, according kay Camus, this act of clinging and believing in irrational beliefs, confining ourselves within these absurd walls to evade the absurd, is called philosophical suicide. Paniniwala natin sa karma, God's plan, pagbibigay natin ng meaning sa mga nangyayari sa atin. For example, mga misfortunes na nangyayari sa atin, sinasabi natin na part to ng plano ni God para sa buhay ko. Namatayin tayo ng minamahal sa buhay, sinasabi natin part to ni God. Baka time na talaga niya, gusto na siyang kunin ni God. Yun yung philosophical suicide. Now, Camus also addressed some existentialists in his philosophical essay like Karl Jaspers, Chestov, Husserl, and Kierkegaard for generally trying to evade the confrontation with the absurd by giving or associating some sort of transcendental meaning with life. To better understand, gawin nating example si Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard is a Danish philosopher, and he realized that not everything can be rationally explained. Kumbaga, he became aware to the absurdity of life na hindi lahat nasasagot ng tao. However, he tried to find something to hold on to, something that can give us clarity and guidance in the face of the unknown. And what he found as an answer is taking a leap of faith. Now, according to Camus, this is an example of an evasion of the confrontation with the absurd. Now, bakit? Well, because like Kierkegaard, he said that reason has its limits and not everything can be explained, and we should not construct transcendent meanings regarding the absurd. Yun yung pinagkaiba nila ni Camus. Kasi si Kierkegaard, na-realize niya na may mga absurdity yung life, na may mga bagay na hindi natin ma-explain or masagot. And kahit magtanong tayo, hindi natin masasagot. So, umasa siya at naghanap siya ng answer, take a leap of faith na lang. Unlike Camus, na iniisip lang niya na walang meaning yung life, na hindi natin ma-explain to a period. Walang reason kung bakit nangyari yung bagay na to a period. Wala siyang binibigay na deeper meaning dun sa nangyayari. In short, we should view life as random according kay Camus. All things happen randomly. It is meaningless, and all forms of meaning are only the product of the human mind. And kahit na may deeper meaning or transcendent meaning man yung buhay, imposible daw nating malaman ito dahil tao lang tayo. As Camus said, quote, "I don't know whether this world has a meaning that transcends it, but I know that I do not know that meaning, and that it is impossible for me just now to know it. What can a meaning outside my condition mean to me? I can understand only in human terms." Now, at some point, when we finally become aware of life being absurd, bigla na lang nating tatanungin yung sarili natin ng tanong na bakit? Nang madaming instances and scenarios kung saan nangyayari to, especially when we are at our lowest point. Example, sa students. Ulit-ulit lang yung ginagawa natin araw-araw, lalo na pag may klase. Gigising, kakain, mag-aaral for ilang hours, kakain, mag-aaral ulit, then kakain ng dinner, then gagawa ng recs. Matutulog, then repeat. And we repeat this cycle for how many years? And kapag napunta na tayo sa lowest point natin, pag na-stress na tayo sa ACADS, pag natambakan na tayo ng recs, and napapagod na tayo, hindi na tayo maka-keep up, bigla na lang nating tatanong sa sarili natin, ba't ba ako nagpapakapagod para dito? Ba't ako nag-aaral Ba't ako napapaka-stress para sa pag-aaral? Bakit pa ako nag-aaral kung mamamatay naman ako sa huli? Diba? Same with other people like workers. Napapaisip din sila ng ganyan kapag lowest point na ng buhay nila. And so, if living only leads to the probability of useless suffering and the certainty of death, and trying to find meaning in our lives only result to failure, then isn't suicide the rational move? Hindi ba dapat tapusin na lang agad kaysa sa mag-suffer tayo para sa wala, mahirapan tayo sa buhay para sa wala? Total meaningless naman yung life, meaningless yung mundo. However, Camus stated that a life without meaning is not necessarily bad. Living with the absurd means that you live a life of freedom. Freedom from false hope and false beliefs, such as the afterlife, heaven, and he calls this freedom the absurd freedom. O bakit hindi siya necessarily bad? Bakit sinasabi ni Camus yun? Well, dahil mas makaka-focus daw tayo sa present, sa buhay natin, kung ano yung nangyayari sa harap natin ngayon, living life to its fullest. Kung wala namang afterlife, kung wala namang heaven and hell, kung walang reincarnation, hindi na natin kailangan isipin yung mga yan. Hindi na natin kailangan paulit-ulit magtanong. Mas mag-focus na lang tayo dun sa life, sa present. Habang buhay pa tayo, gawin natin yung kaya natin gawin. This is similar to the quote of Pindar earlier na sinasabing, "O my soul, do not aspire to immortal life, but exhaust the limits of the possible." Now, in order to achieve absurd freedom, we have to attain lucidity, which is the ability of our minds to be clear and have the courage to refuse all comforting illusions and self-deceptions. In short, to break the absurd walls confining us. Second is to revolt, which simply means the refusal to rely on suicide in the face of absurdity, to keep living despite life being meaningless, despite the misfortunes that life gives us, despite being aware of the absurdity of life. Yung pinipili pa rin nating mabuhay kahit na mahirap mamuhay. Camus calls someone who lives life to the fullest in the face of absurdity as the absurd hero. Ito yung taong pinipili pa rin mabuhay kahit na madaming pasakit sa buhay, madaming hirap na nararanasan sa buhay, despite a life of despair. And, ginawa niyang example, si Sisyphus. Kasi 'di ba, yung ending ng buhay ni Sisyphus ay yung pagdudusa niya for eternity. And kahit ilang beses pa nating i-analyze yun, maghanap ng meaning dun sa naging fate niya, hindi tayo makakahanap ng meaning kasi meaningless yun. Anong meaning ng endless suffering niya? Wala. Now, sinasabi ni Camus, imagine Sisyphus happy. What if, despite that life of suffering, nakahanap si Sisyphus ng reason to be happy? Basically, this is what Camus wants to convey with his philosophical essay. It is to face absurdity and live with it. Kasi kagaya ni Sisyphus, tayo ding mga tao, similar yung fate natin, yung life natin. We live in a meaningless life and nakararanas din tayo ng suffering, mga misfortunes. For example, students, sabihin na natin mga students, ilang years tayong mas-stress, ilang years tayong mapapagod, ilang years tayong ginagawa ng yung same cycle na ginagawa natin. Tulog, aral, kain, tulog, aral, kain. But despite all that, we still choose to continue learning. We still choose to live kahit gaano kahirap ang buhay. And that is the most rebellious act that we can do against the absurd. Finding joy and happiness and being contented with life, even if it feels like a punishment.